Hey, we're back here on Readout Productions, doing what I normally do, freeze my butt off in the Pennsylvania winter. Don't worry though, most of today is involving being indoors, whether it be traveling inside your car and enjoying the heat, although mine takes an awfully long time to heat up, but nevertheless, or what we're going to be about to do, we're about to go into a museum today and warm up, and we're going to be talking about transportation. Particularly, we're going to be talking about the highway they could hear right behind me. Typically, it's known as US 30 today, but many years ago, and still today technically, it is known as part of the Lincoln Highway, one of the first transcontinental roadways that connected from New York to San Francisco, connecting either end of the United States. Let's go check it out. And before we get into the history of the Lincoln Highway, there's actually some history to the building we're about to enter. This is known locally as the Johnson Home, and is actually the birthplace of future Pennsylvania Governor Johnson. He was governor from 1848 to 1852. He was born near here, so not technically his birthplace, but this house was built by his father in 1815. And this is where he grew up here. Governor Johnson grew up here, what was once known as the Kingston House, now the Johnson House, and now a museum which has nothing to do with Governor Johnson. So we got our admissions checked in, and there's actually a 13-minute documentary that'll give you an orientation of the Lincoln Highway, and it's really good to watch, especially if you have no background on what this road network is. They also give you how the exhibit works. It's self-guided, and this is one of the first museums I've been to. Really cool idea. They give you these audio wands, and basically you go around the exhibit. They'll have numbers for the exhibits, dial the number in, and it gives you a nice audio presentation on the items. It's not just talking too. There's a lot of sound effects, really immerse you into the experience. Now that gives you a visual of the Lincoln Highway, at least a portion of it, I would say, on the western and central portions of Pennsylvania. We're right here, just about to go inside the Loyalhanna Gorge, which cuts through Chestnut Ridge right here. And to give you an idea, the Lincoln Highway said it goes from New York to San Francisco. You can go coast to coast across the United States, goes through dozens of states. But I personally feel that Pennsylvania's portion of the Lincoln Highway is the most historic. This might just be one of the most historic roadways in the country. Take a look here. If you're coming from the east, of course you have the whole eastern side with Philadelphia and everything. But then when you get to, you have Gettysburg, where the Battle of Gettysburg occurs, bloodiest battle in American history, probably one of the most important battles in American history. And then you get to go through these cool state parks here. Chambersburg is a cool little town that actually got burned in 1864 during the Civil War. Worth doing the video on someday. I'm going to get to that someday. Then you got historic Fort Loudon, which this is bringing in 100 years earlier the Civil War. You have the French and Indian War, and there was a chain of forts that a British army built trying to advance from the East Coast to get to what was a French outpost, Fort Duquesne, now Pittsburgh, and I got a ton of videos about that conflict. Fort Loudon's really cool to visit. Get over these mountains, very treacherous. Silent Hill is very treacherous, be advised. Breezewood is kind of the intersection, I would say, of the Mid-Atlantic region. Here's where you have highways going up to New York, going down to Baltimore and DC, go into Philadelphia, go into Pittsburgh. Bedford was another fort built during that British campaign in 1758. Got a video on that. Then, of course, more modern history of Flight 93 National Memorial, right off Lincoln Highway. And then over here, there's a new memorial started in Patriot Park. You go through Stoystown. This is the scenic 7 miles. You can actually see 7 miles across the Lincoln Highway right for this region. Get over Laurel Ridge. You go for a little community of Loughlintown where Compass Inn is, a very old stagecoach stop. And in Ligonier, you have Fort Ligonier, another British fort as the Army advanced. Through the gorge, you have the Lincoln Highway Heritage Experience. Latrobe, the birthplace of Fred Rogers. Going through Greensburg, a little bit off the way is Bushy Run Battlefield, a fighting action that occurred during Pontiac's Rebellion. And of course, you end up in downtown Pittsburgh, where the French had built Fort Duquesne, later to be the British Fort Pitt, and eventually, of course, Pittsburgh with its various steel industry. I don't think there's many other places like it in the country. Something especially cool when you get into transportation automobile history is the evolution of license plates. The marquee over here says that the first state to require state-issued license plates was Massachusetts in 1903. Prior to that, people were just basically making wooden license plates and etching in their initials. I'm sure there were a lot of similarities there. And then around 1917, that's when you begin getting the porcelain or embossed steel license plates. They stopped using porcelain after 1942 to conserve metal during World War II. And then beginning with Illinois, they began actually doing paper fiber board. Ooh, don't know how well those would hold up. And today, raw materials used to make license plates include aluminum, reprinted with color reflective and adhesive sheeting and paint. The Pennsylvania's always had, this is the current PA license plate. Pennsylvania's had also a particularly cool evolution of its license plates. And actually, I believe you can interact and flip them up. Yeah, look at that. Get ready to feel the economic pain. One of the coolest things to collect in transportation gotta be these maps given out at various gas stations. It's just a small sample. I got my own little stash at home. Golf typically is the most popular to collect. Look at this down here. It looks like a travel-themed card game, including Out of Gasoline, which is probably its equivalent of Go to Jail card. Now, I plan someday to do a video expressly about this iconic landmark along the Lincoln Highway, but just a couple cliff notes for now. It was erected by Herbert Paulson in 1932 and had the tagline of "See Free States in 7 counties." Now, he had always had some type of roadside restaurant on top of the ridge, but it became more and more bigger and eventually decided to attract visitors, turned it into what looked like a ship. So yeah, literally, if you were down in the valley there going towards Shellsburg, you would literally see a ship up in the mountains. And it was a restaurant, it was a hotel, and what was really popular was people to stop, cool their radiators, and then up here on the floor here, he actually had telescopes so you can look out and get that view of the free states and 7 counties. And right here in the museum, we actually have a part of one of those telescopes. A lot of memorabilia here from the ship hotel. Sadly, what ended up happening was, I think it kind of ran out of style. The owners got up there in age, sold it off to a new owner. Then in the 70s or 80s, they turned it into Noah's Ark. They put on this dark brown clapperboard, which didn't make the building look too attractive. Found to neglect, and then it was either 2000 or 2001, caught fire and burned to the ground. Good news is you can still pull over there and get that free state 7 county view. Highly recommend it. Now, I may be a youngster, but even I have a piece of history here that I can connect to. This here is some remains from the sign to the Highway Drive-In movie theater. It was not far, just a few miles to the west of us in Latrobe, right along 30. It is the only drive-in movie theater I have ever actually been at to see a movie. Ah, I got it. I saw Night at the Museum 2, Battle at Smithsonian. I'm a history nerd, remember. Now, what is a transportation museum without a car? And here is one here. This is a 1937 Packard, which, according to the audio wand, was the car to use on the Lincoln Highway at the time. And now, this wasn't your standard run-the-mill car for any family. It cost just about as much of an annual wage when it was sold in 1937. This particular Packard has only had 3 owners in existence. What's pretty cool is I've noticed, if you get on the other side, you can see how long it's been since it's changed hands, because the sticker on here is from 1983, so even the sticker is an antique in its own self. And I mean, yeah, pretty snazzy car to ride in. When I first heard about the Lincoln Highway Heritage Experience being established out here, one of the things I was most eager for was to see the commemoration of a landmark here in the Ligonier Latrobe area, and that was the Shirley Cabin. Shirley? I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. These were tourist cabins that were about 4 or 5 miles to the east of us, 2 miles west of Ligonier. There was about a dozen of them, and they were these small white cottages. And we'll take a peek inside, give you an idea what it's like. And there were motor stops like this all across Lincoln Highway, and for that matter, all across the United States highways back in the early 20th century. Eventually, this particular complex ended up having its upgraded to a motel lodging here, which this artwork depicts. I think it had a gas station at one point as well. Really popular. Went out of business in the late 90s, early 2000s. Unfortunately, if you go there today, there's nothing to tell you what was standing there. It's marsh game preserve land. However, there were a few cottages that survived. I think they auctioned them off. This one obviously has been restored to its period appearance. And I think there's another one actually standing that's now on the property of the Colonial Inn, the neighbor of the old motor court. There's been a variety of markers to designate the Lincoln Highway. Some of the more famous ones are the 1928 concrete pillars. This one was donated in the memory of Gail L. and Chris F. Moorish. I apologize if I mispronounced that name. It was found nearby here in Unity Township, and you can see it had been neglected for some time when Moorish picked it up and donated it to the museum. Gotta love the advertising on this. They got the Disney Channel. Gotta sucker the kids in. In 1919, the Motor Transport Corps of the United States Army organized a truck caravan that crossed the Lincoln Highway, started in D.C. and went all the way across to San Francisco, which of course back then we're dealing with unmaintained dirt roads, and you're taking heavy military vehicles. I believe they had 2 truck companies, about 40 trucks in total were involved. But what's pretty memorable about it is a gentleman that was involved with it. This guy over here is Harry C. Ottersman. He was a civilian guide and the LHA secretary during the caravan. But there's also a guy involved, some dude by the name of Dwight Eisenhower. I don't know, some famous dude who became president. I'm supposed to say important things about him.
And this is my favorite thing in the whole museum right here. And you can probably replicate it relatively inexpensively. There's nothing special about these specific items aside from the fact that they're all in one place. And what this is a framed compilation of all the collar insignia for all of the participating corps from the 1919 Transcontinental Motor Convoy along the Lincoln Highway. And you know, when you think about moving trucks, you don't really think about all that goes into it. You might think you'd need some drivers, some mechanics, and you know, that might be it, maybe a little bit of engineers, but you know, there were 10 different corps that went into this project, and it was as much about testing the road as it was testing the new vehicles. You know, it was World War I really that made the Army decide, you know, horsepower, like literal horsepower, is kind of the thing of the past. Let's test out these new motor trucks and see if it's gonna become the dominant form of transport. So like you can see from the pictures of the convoy and from some of the archival footage in the tour earlier, like it took a massive effort to make that happen. And you can see not just, you know, your motorists and your engineers, but you know, for each of these corps, there's an element that they bring to the convoy itself. So the now defunct Motor Transport Corps is now just the Transport Corps, but the Corps of Engineers, the Quartermaster Corps, the Signal Corps, the Medical Corps, those 4 are all still in existence. The Tank Corps, which has now been replaced by the Armored Corps, the Ordnance Corps, which is still around, the Aviators Corps, which was folded from the Army into the Air Force just after World War II, but there's still, you know, you've still got your helicopter pilots and stuff like that, but it's no longer called the Aviators Corps. And then you've got the Field Artillery and the Coastal Artillery, and the coastal artillery was folded into, that was kind of dissolved.
Yeah,
but you can look at this, and there's a ton of history to be seen. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different corps that don't even exist anymore, and the function that they had was important for the time, but maybe not so much now. But it just goes to show how much effort from all different directions and angles it took to make this 60-day convoy happen. It doesn't just take truck drivers and mechanics, it takes doctors, it takes engineers, it takes the eye of the tank corps and the ordnance corps and the artillery to see, okay, well, this is fine with trucks, but can we move tanks? Can we move large amounts of ordnance for the quartermaster? How much logistical power is it going to take to make this happen on campaign? This experiment was also testing the defense viability of roads in America. It's Eisenhower being here as a lieutenant colonel in 1919, between his experience with the Lincoln Highway and 2 tours in Germany for both World Wars, he could see where Germany was strong in its infrastructure for national defense and where the United States kind of needed to improve on that front. He'd seen from firsthand on the Lincoln Highway, it's nice to have, but it's not in great condition. And so what did he do during his presidency? He implemented the interstate system as much for national defense as for just casual travel. And it's easy to draw that conclusion from his experiences on the Lincoln Highway and in Germany with the Autobahn to then come during his presidency and make this happen. And it all was from the efforts of these 10 corps and the men that were participating in the convoy at the time. So yeah, that's why this is my favorite thing in the whole museum.
All right, that's concluding our stop here at the Lincoln Highway Heritage Experience. We're definitely going to come back here when I do an event sometime in the spring, the summer. I've spent about 2 hours here, which is a lot longer than I anticipated, so there is definitely plenty to spend an afternoon in there. So if you happen to be in the Ligonier, Latrobe region, hopefully you're passing on 30 East. Just pull off here, stop here at the Johnson House, which is now a museum to the Lincoln Highway, and learn a thing about the road you're driving on. We'll see you guys in the next video. I'm getting out of the cold.